The knock at 10:41 p.m. wasn't a courtesy visit. It was an execution. When I opened the door and saw Sarah Collins standing there in her $3,000 coat, soaked from Seattle rain, with eyes colder than the Puget Sound in December, I knew my life was about to crack wide open. She didn't wait for an invitation, didn't apologize for the late hour, just stepped into my cramped apartment reeking of old pizza and unwashed laundry, looked around at the evidence of my slow-motion collapse, and said the words that would either destroy me or save me. I'm Michael Rivers, 35 years old, cybersecurity analyst for Collins Digital, single father to a 7-year-old kid who deserves better than the zombie I've become. 2 years ago, my wife died in a car accident on I-5 during a freak ice storm, and I've been operating on autopilot ever since, confusing survival with living, mistaking exhaustion for strength. My apartment tells the whole pathetic story without words. Stacks of unpaid bills next to Ethan's dinosaur drawings, frozen dinners for one multiplied by 730 nights, and the kind of silence that screams louder than any argument. Sarah stood in my hallway dripping rainwater onto the cheap linoleum, and I could see her cataloging every failure. The toys scattered like evidence of neglect, the overflowing trash, the electric bill reminder stuck to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a school bus. She was CEO of a billion-dollar tech company, and here she was in my disaster zone at nearly 11 at night, her designer heels clicking judgment with every step. "You're fired," she said, and the words landed like a punch to the solar plexus. I opened my mouth to respond, to beg, to explain about the mortgage and Ethan's insurance and how I couldn't lose this job because it was literally the only thing holding us above water. But then I heard the soft padding of small feet behind me. My son appeared in his dinosaur pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes, looking between me and this strange woman with the kind of awareness that 7-year-olds shouldn't possess. He didn't ask who she was. He asked if he did something wrong. That question gutted me worse than the firing, worse than anything, because Ethan had learned to make himself small, to be convenient, to shoulder blame that wasn't his just to make my life easier. I watched Sarah's iron mask crack for just a second, watched her eyes soften as she looked at my son, and I realized she wasn't seeing an employee's kid. She was seeing something personal, something that hurt her in ways I didn't understand yet. "Go back to bed, buddy," I managed, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. "Everything's fine." He hesitated, and I could see him calculating whether to believe me, whether to push for truth or accept the comfortable lie. He chose the lie, like he always did, and shuffled back to his room. The door clicked shut, and Sarah's expression hardened again. "Do you know how many emails I sent you in the past 6 months?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries or build-ups. 47. 47 attempts to get you to take time off, to use your vacation days, to talk to HR about counseling services. You ignored every single one. I had ignored them. I'd seen them as tests, as traps designed to identify the weak links in the company. I'd thought responding would mark me as unreliable, as someone who couldn't handle the pressure. I'd worked 90-hour weeks thinking it made me valuable, thinking it proved I was strong enough to survive anything. "I was trying to do my job," I said, and it sounded pathetic even to my own ears. "Your job?" Sarah's laugh was bitter, sharp as broken glass. "Your job was to be a cybersecurity analyst, not a martyr. You think burning yourself out helps anyone? You think your son benefits from having a father who's physically present but emotionally dead?" The truth of it hit like cold water. I'd been so focused on not failing, on keeping the paycheck coming, on maintaining some illusion of stability for Ethan, that I'd failed at everything that actually mattered. I'd become a machine, efficient and productive, and completely hollow. "I wasn't firing you to punish you," Sarah continued, pacing my small living room like a caged animal. "I was trying to save you from yourself, but there's a complication you don't know about." The way she said complication made my blood run cold. "Brian Hawke has been building a case against you for 3 months, she said, and suddenly the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "While I was trying to help you, he was positioning you as a liability, as someone unstable, potentially dangerous to company security." Brian Hawke, our chief financial officer, a man who looked at humans as resources to be optimized or discarded. I'd interacted with him maybe 5 times in my entire tenure at Collins Digital, and each time I'd felt like I needed a shower afterward. He had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes, the kind of handshake that felt like a threat. "Why would he care about me?" I asked. "I'm nobody?" "Exactly," Sarah said. "You're perfect. A grieving widower, working insane hours, showing signs of instability. If something were to go wrong, if money were to go missing, if security were to be compromised, you'd be the ideal scapegoat." The implication hung in the air like smoke. I felt my paranoia, that constant companion of every cybersecurity professional, start to howl. I'd built the digital defenses for Collins Digital. I knew every back door, every vulnerability, every point where someone could slip through if they knew what they were looking for. And I'd left myself one secret entrance, one tiny crack in the armor, because trust is a luxury in my profession. "I need to check something," I said, moving toward my laptop. Sarah didn't try to stop me. She just stood there, arms crossed, while I accessed the company servers through my personal back door, the one I'd never documented, the one I'd told myself was just insurance. What I found made my hands freeze above the keyboard. Transaction logs, dozens of them, all bearing my credentials. Money moving through accounts in patterns I recognized because I'd studied financial fraud for years. Except I hadn't made these transfers. I hadn't touched these accounts. But my digital signature was all over them, my access codes, my timestamps. "He's framing me," I whispered, and the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what I was seeing. "This isn't just about firing me. This is about federal prison. This is about taking Ethan away from me permanently." Sarah moved closer, looking at the screen over my shoulder. I could smell her perfume, something expensive and foreign, cutting through the stale air of my apartment. "I know," she said quietly. "I've suspected for weeks, but I couldn't prove it. Hawke's too smart, too careful. He's been using your burnout, your isolation, as cover. If I'd fired you outright, he would have triggered whatever endgame he's planning. But if I could get you to quit, to take a buyout and disappear quietly, you'd be safe." "Safe from what? Prison? Losing my kid?" The anger was rising now, replacing the shock. "You wanted me to run." "I wanted you to survive," Sarah snapped back. "Do you know what Hawke is capable of? He's destroyed careers, bankrupted competitors, ruined lives, and he always walks away clean. Taking him on directly is suicide." "Then I guess I'm suicidal," I said, and I meant it. Looking at my son's bedroom door, thinking about Ethan growing up visiting me behind bars, watching him get placed in foster care because his father was convicted of corporate fraud, I felt something shift inside me. The exhaustion, the grief, the 2 years of just surviving, it all crystallized into something sharp and focused. "I'm not running," I told Sarah. "I'm going to take him down." She studied me for a long moment, and I couldn't read her expression. Then she nodded, just once. "Then you're going to need help," she said, "because Hawk doesn't fight fair, and he has resources you can't imagine." The next week was a descent into controlled chaos. My credit cards started getting declined. A black sedan began showing up outside Ethan's school. Small things at first, deniable things, but the message was clear. Hawk knew I wasn't backing down, and he was escalating. The worst moment came on a Tuesday afternoon. The school called. Ethan wasn't in class. He wasn't anywhere. For 2 hours and 17 minutes, I experienced a special kind of hell reserved for parents, the kind where every dark possibility plays on loop in your brain, where you bargain with God and the universe and anyone who might be listening. He was fine. It was a computer glitch in the attendance system, they said. A technical error that showed him absent when he'd been in class the whole time. But I knew better. I knew someone had hacked the school's database, someone had demonstrated they could reach my son any time they wanted. The message wasn't subtle. That night, after Ethan was asleep, after I'd checked his door 3 times and set up motion sensors I'd built from parts I had lying around, I made a decision. I started digging through Collins Digital's records with a vengeance, using every backdoor I knew, every vulnerability I'd ever discovered and quietly patched. I wasn't just defending anymore. I was hunting. What I found was breathtaking in its audacity. Hawk hadn't just been skimming money. He'd been running an entire shadow operation within the company, moving funds through shell corporations, using Collins Digital's reputation as cover for his own deals. The fraud went back 5 years and involved amounts that made my head spin. Tens of millions of dollars, all carefully laundered, all hidden behind legitimate-looking transactions. And he'd been preparing me as his exit strategy. When it all came crashing down, when the auditors finally noticed, when the SEC came knocking, my name would be on everything. The unstable widower who'd cracked under pressure and stolen from the company that had been so generous to him in his time of grief. It was perfect. It was diabolical. It was almost beautiful in its simplicity. I copied everything. Every transaction, every shell company, every forged signature. I compiled it all onto an encrypted drive and called Sarah. "I have what we need," I said, "but we need to do this right. If Hawk suspects we're coming for him, he'll burn everything and disappear." "There's an old pier on the waterfront," Sarah said. "Industrial district. Abandoned since the shipping companies moved out. Meet me there tomorrow night. No phones, no electronics that can be traced. Just you, me, and whatever evidence you've gathered." It sounded like something out of a noir film, which felt appropriate given how surreal my life had become. The next evening, I left Ethan with my neighbor, a retired teacher who asked no questions and just gave me a look that said she understood more than I'd told her. The pier smelled like salt and rotting wood and diesel fuel, the kind of place where deals get made and bodies get hidden, though I tried not to think about that too hard. Sarah was already there when I arrived, standing under a broken streetlight that flickered like a dying firefly. "Did you bring it?" she asked. I held up the drive. Everything. 5 years of fraud, all documented, all traceable back to Hawk. "Good," said a voice behind me, and my blood turned to ice. Brian Hawk stepped out of the shadows, and he wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, the kind of anonymous muscle you can rent by the hour in any major city. He looked expensive and untouchable in his designer coat, his perfect hair barely moving in the wind off the water. "You really should have taken the buyout, Rivers," he said, and his voice was almost friendly. "Sarah offered you a clean exit. Money, references, a fresh start somewhere else, but you had to be a hero." "You're framing me for your crimes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're trying to send me to prison so you can keep stealing." "Stealing?" Hawk laughed. "I prefer to think of it as optimization. Collins Digital makes more money than it knows what to do with. I'm just redistributing it more efficiently. And yes, when the time came to close up shop, you would have been a convenient explanation. Nothing personal." "It's personal to me," I said. "It's personal when you threaten my son." Something flickered across Hawk's face, maybe surprise that I'd noticed his intimidation tactics, maybe annoyance that I was still fighting back. "Your son will be fine," he said. "Foster care in Washington State is actually quite good. He'll probably be better off without a convicted felon for a father." The rage that swept through me was white-hot and clarifying. I'd spent 2 years being numb, being functional, being barely alive. But threatening Ethan brought everything back into sharp focus. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was dangerous. "Here's the thing about being a cybersecurity analyst, Hawk," I said, taking a step toward him despite the muscle flanking him. "You learn to think like criminals. You learn to anticipate moves, to plan for contingencies. You really think I'd come here without insurance?" I held up the encrypted drive. "This is a copy. The original is already with the FBI, along with a detailed statement, time-stamped and authenticated, explaining everything. If I don't check in by midnight tonight, they open the files." It was a bluff. A complete, desperate bluff. But Hawk didn't know that, and I watched his confidence crack just a little. "You're lying," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Am I?" I turned to Sarah. "Tell him about the meeting you had yesterday with the federal prosecutors. Tell him about the immunity deal you negotiated for testifying against him." Sarah's expression didn't change, but she nodded slowly. "It's over, Brian. Take the deal they're offering. Cooperate, and maybe you see daylight again before you're 70. That was when Hawk made his mistake. He lunged for me, going for the drive in my hand, and his hired muscle moved to back him up. But Sarah had planned for this, too. Lights flooded the pier from multiple directions, and federal agents seemed to materialize from nowhere, shouting commands, weapons drawn. Later, I'd learned that Sarah had been working with the FBI for months, building a case against Hawk. My discoveries had been the final piece, the smoking gun they needed. But in that moment, watching Hawk get wrestled to the ground and cuffed, watching his perfect facade crumble into something desperate and pathetic, I felt only a cold satisfaction. The next morning, I was sitting in a diner with Ethan, sharing pancakes and watching the news on the TV above the counter. Collins Digital's stock took a hit when the FBI raid became public, but Sarah's press conference stabilized things. She framed it as the company cleaning house, rooting out corruption, emerging stronger. Hawk's face was everywhere, being led away in handcuffs, his expensive coat pulled over his head. Ethan asked if the bad man was gone. I told him yes, the bad man was gone. I didn't tell him about the nightmares I'd have for months, about the paranoia that would take years to fade, about the moments I'd wake up panicked that it was all a dream and Hawk was still out there. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. I was back at Collins Digital, but as a consultant, setting my own hours, drawing hard boundaries. At 5 p.m., my laptop closed. No exceptions, no negotiations. Sarah had changed too. The iron mask had cracked enough to let some humanity through. We had coffee sometimes, talked about the corporate warfare we'd survived, but there was no romance in it, just mutual respect and shared trauma. Ethan laughed more. That was the real measure of success. Not the paycheck, not the cleared name, not the satisfaction of watching Hawk's empire crumble. My son's laughter, spontaneous and joyful, was worth more than any victory. I looked out at the Seattle rain, the same rain that had been falling that night Sarah showed up at my door to fire me, and I finally understood what she'd been trying to do. She hadn't been taking my job. She'd been giving me my life back. She'd been freeing me from the prison I'd built after my wife died, the one made of 90-hour weeks and emotional numbness, and the belief that survival was the same as living. I was fired, and in being fired, I was freed. Freed from the machine, freed from the grief that had turned me into a ghost, freed to be Ethan's father instead of just his provider. The corporate scandal, the fraud, the confrontation on that pier, it had all been necessary to break me out of the cage I'd locked myself in. Sometimes the only way to save someone is to destroy what they think they need. Sarah understood that. She'd fired me to save me, and in doing so, she'd saved both of us from the destruction Hawk had planned. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman I'd thought was my enemy had been my ally all along. The job I'd thought was my salvation had been my prison, and the firing I'd thought would ruin me had been the best thing that ever happened to me. Now I was free. Free to live, free to be present, free to build something real with my son instead of just surviving alongside him. The rain kept falling on Seattle, but I wasn't drowning anymore. I was finally, actually, breathing.